The other day we made a handheld bending wrench, and these are often used in conjunction with a second bending wrench that is either placed in the hardy hole of the anvil or in the vise. Now for using two of these, I really prefer vise mounted forks or wrenches over the anvil mounted. If I'm just using one for quick rough bends at the anvil mounted ones are better. But to use this tool, we want to make the tool that goes in the vise, and that's better for bending scrolls and things like that, or more controlled things. It doesn't have to be a scroll. There are lots of bends that you make that these tools come in handy. So let's look at making a simple double-ended, because you can stand it up either way, so you can get two out of one, little bending fork for the vise. I'm going to start with the same 1/2 inch by 1.25 inch bar stock that we made this out of. This is part of what I cut off, and that's just because it's what I have. Nothing magical about that size, and I'm starting with a 4.5 inch piece. Again, mine are made out of old road grader blades. Very hard stuff to work, but the odds of ever breaking one or bending one are very slim. If you make them out of mild steel, you just have to be a little bit more careful, and if you need to bend heavier, bigger material, you need to make heavier, bigger bending forks. This project pretty much just requires a few tools. A punch for the way I'm going to do it. You can get by with just using a chisel, and I'll explain the reason why I'm going to punch. But a punch and a hot chisel, and if you are not comfortable punching a hole centered or chiseling a line centered by eye, by all means lay this out cold with a silver pencil or a soapstone, and then run a chisel while it's cold down that line, and that'll give you something you can see when it's hot. I let that cool down pretty well, but I'm just going to punch a hole about 1 inch, 1.25 inches down. The exact sizes don't matter all that much. This is a functional tool, even if your size is a little off of what you thought you were going to make. But I want to punch through to relieve stress and to reduce the risk of a cold shut, make it just a little bit finer tool in the bottom. Ultimately, that punched hole pretty much goes away. It's much easier to punch this hole if it's hot. If I don't talk about it first, it'll be hotter. Cool your punch off. And turn it around. And we'll do the other side and we'll get a close-up. There's our little biscuit. And that's all we need to do with a punch. And I'll go ahead and turn the other side, turn it around, and we'll punch the other side, get both holes punched first. Centered and about 1 inch, 1.5 inches down, somewhere in there. I'm just dipping the punch in water to keep it from overheating too badly. Ultimately, we're shearing the slug out, so the fact that it's cold actually helps it shear. Try not to drop it on the floor, though. That does take time away from you. So there we have 2 holes punched in this. I'm going to drift one a little bit larger because I want 2 different size ends here. But this little slug here is the size slug we're getting out of our punched holes. So just using my tapered punch over the Pritchel hole, I'm going to start drifting this out a little bit. Now, that cools off pretty fast next to the cold punch. But if I take the punch out and let it sit just a little bit, the heat bleeds back into that area, and I can do this again. And of course, mild steel is more forgiving than a road grader blade or even something like 4140. That's all I need to do at the punch. The next thing I'm going to do now is chisel these and split that apart. I'm going to work from both sides. This is where a layout mark with a chisel that you can index comes in handy. But I'm going to do it by eye because I think I can pull it off. So I'm going to work from both sides here. You take the chisel out and look at what you're doing. You can see if you're lined up. And after the first blow or two, you can still fix some minor misalignment. It's fairly easy to center the chisel on the hole. That's easy to see. You guys probably have a better view of the other end of the chisel, but I want to go right over the other cut, meet in the middle if I can. So now I have no choice but chisel where I've started. But those look like they line up pretty good. Notice I've put a piece of mild steel under this so when I cut through I don't accidentally ding my anvil. Bad for the anvil, bad for the chisel, bad for my attitude. So we'll keep the anvil and the chisel happy and I'll be happy. So that's just split. Now we're going to have to clean this up. I'm going to spread this apart, make the forks, and then bring them back up again. But we'll need to clean up that edge of the hole, but that makes a nice bottom for our slot here. As long as we're working with the chisel, I'm just going to go ahead and chisel both sides here. That's just a hair off, so because I didn't go very deep, I can still work on straightening it. That looks a lot better. Really, these tools are forgiving. They're just a place to apply leverage, and if something's not perfectly centered, it really doesn't affect the leverage. Make sure your cuts are one on top of the other. That's actually more important at this stage than centering it down the length of the bar. That way they will line up nicely. This isn't too hard to do. You can certainly do this with a bandsaw or with a cut-off disc on an angle grinder. Whatever it is that you got. In fact, cutting it would make for a neater job, and it would be a little bit simpler in the long run because we're going to have some filing to do now. So now I'm also done with the chisel. I'm going to put the punch and the chisel away, get them out of my way so I don't knock them on the floor. Next thing we need to do is spread these so I can get in there and clean up that odd little spot where the chisel cut and the punched hole meet. This is a place this monstrously tall Hardy can come in quite handy. I don't drive the Hardy all the way into the cut, but you can see how that opens up the cut. And since we have this tool out, I'm just going to open both sides up. You need a letter X or something, I guess this is how you make it. X marks the spot. I'm going to open them up just a little bit further over a fuller. The idea here is that I need to be able to get in there with a file. Now I'm not sure what I'm looking at here, but that looks like it has potential to be some other piece. If we actually came down so that center section is square, you'd have 4 arms on a piece, perhaps for some kind of a knob or valve handle or something like that. So it pays to stop and look at what you're doing, because sometimes you see another project in there. This is an excellent place to make use of a hot rasp. I just want to make sure there's no burr that's going to get forged into a cold shut, particularly down where that cut meets the hole. Once I've cleaned that up, and get rid of any other burrs, the rest of that can be forged. In keeping with the theme of as long as we're there anyways, let's take this other one down. If you've never hot rasped, I do have a video that discusses the concept. So that has all the burrs and rag and all that nasty stuff off. Let's go back to the anvil. What I don't have are nice, even, parallel forks. So that's what I want to do. I just want to square these up. Also draws it out a little bit, and then when it's what I want, I can put a bevel in so that it doesn't mar the work quite as readily. This may take a little filing on the inside when we're done. We'll just have to see. So there's one. Let's do another one. Do all 4 just the same. So that's pretty much one side. I'll have to straighten those out to kind of see what they want to be spread-wise and everything else, but I'm going to do the other side first. Make sure your aim's good enough you don't hit that tine. If you're worried about it, you might want to work from the inside, although this one's more in my way than that one was. Now this is the side with the smaller hole. I'm actually going to make these tines a little smaller, which means they will also be a little longer, and then I'll trim them off later. That gives a few other options for using the fork. And again, I'm going to put a chamfer in, save some filing later. So that's a skinnier fork than on the first end. So that's about 3/8 inch square. On the other end I'm about 1/2 inch square. So now I can start bringing these back together. Stand these up and make them parallel with each other. The fact that the length is off doesn't really matter at this stage. You can use the Hardy as a wedge again to kind of help open these up. Kind of whatever works at this stage of the game. You can see what we're getting. That's a little more open than I want it to be though. What I want is 3/4 of an inch in between this set. I'm going to make 1 3/4 and 1 an inch. So if I put that 3/4 inch bar in there, that's what I end up with. I've rounded the end of the bar on the grinder. And watch that short bar, it is going to get hot. So that's our first end there. And we'll do a little bit of filing on that. Now we're going to shape the other end, and I want it to be 1 inch. So my bar, that I'm going to cool off here in a second, is 3/4 by 1, so I get to use the other dimension in this side. We're going to do the same thing on this side, but we're aiming for a 1 inch space between the tines. This is a place where an extra set of hands would come in handy, because you could hold the spacer and this, and somebody else could tighten your vise jaws. And if you lock that in the vise, it would be very handy. Try to straighten everything up a little bit here. And that's pretty much the second side. Just a little bit of cleaning up and straightening, and then some filing. Just a little bit crooked is what I'm trying to straighten here. That's much better. So that's it. I'm going to clean this end up, and then I'm going to trim this in so that the forks are the same length on both ends. Just going to trim that off and make sure the inside is smooth. And if you need to clean up down here in the curve, just use a round file. Now when you're working this, you don't put your material down there. You got to keep it up here where it's parallel. Well, it's not too difficult a project. It's a little easier than the handheld bending fork. And you get two different sizes this way. Don't have to build them in two sizes. You can build them single-sided. That ends up with a 1-inch space on one end and a 3/4 space on the other end. The tines on the smaller side are 3/8. The tines on the larger side are 1/2 inch, so they're a little heavier duty. And you can make these in as many size combinations as you think you might need. Remember, we use mild steel, so it's not going to put up with a whole lot of abuse, but reasonable use, it should last a lifetime. If you need to bend heavier material, make heavier forks, or work your material hotter. If you put 1/2 inch material in here hot, it's going to be plenty substantial to bend it, but bending cold, you're going to need a heavier fork probably for that kind of stuff. But for bending 1/8 or 1/4 inch stock that you typically use for scrolls, this is fine. You'll never need anything else. Now, what if you really don't want to take the time to make that style of bending fork? There is a much easier method, and I do it all the time. I don't like them as well as I like this. I think the flat stays in the vise better and gets more clamp pressure on it. But up here, above the vise hanging from the Windows frame, I have a whole bunch of bending forks. That one's looks like 1 inch round. It's got about a 1/2 inch hole. Here's 3/4 inch bar with about 1.5 inch opening in it. Just whatever size you think you need, just bend a bar 180 degrees, cut it off, lock that in the vise, and you got yourself a really quickie bending fork. They're all mild steel. Fast, simple, easy, but I don't think the vise holds these as well as it holds those flat ones. Nor are they as nice to look at. Before we get serious about actually talking about scrolls and making scrolls, there's one more tool I want to make. It's a hardy tool. It's called a scroll starter, and it just helps establish this end of the scroll. Absolutely an optional tool. I don't actually own one because I've never needed one, but it can come in handy, and some people have asked about it, so we'll make that before we get into scrolls, and then we'll be able to decide whether that's something you really need or not. In the meantime, hope you liked the video. Give it a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, share the videos with your friends, then get out to the shop, make something, but do stay safe, wear your safety glasses, and we'll see you for the next one.